Good morning, everybody. Thanks for being here. This meeting is called to order. I want to welcome fellow committee members joining us here and on phone. BJ Watts is calling in today. And I'm sorry to report that member Brad Oliver was in an auto accident. He is okay, but it looks like he will not be joining us this morning. So thoughts are with him, and hopefully everything checks out okay. I want to thank SBOE staff and DOE staff for being here as well, and all of the committee's guests this morning. Thanks for being here today as we continue to focus on implementing several priority initiatives from the board's recently adopted strategic plan. The minutes are still in process, and I understand they will be provided for the December 14th committee meeting. So first up on the agenda is the balanced scorecard, and we want to review the scorecard. And the purpose of this agenda item is to review updates from the IDOE into the balanced scorecard. As we discussed last meeting, the balanced scorecard is designed to be used to guide the work of the board and the department. The metrics allow us to track the progress we are making and help identify areas of concern. We said at the last meeting that we would populate the scorecard to the extent possible and then start to present it at the monthly regular business meetings. I understand that the IDOE is still working to collect data from our education partners. It has not yet updated the scorecard to reflect data from 2013 to 2014. And just wanted to get an update from the IDOE on the scorecard. And just reviewing it, the latest version that I've seen, it looks like there's a fair amount of blanks, and just wanted to check in with you all and get your thoughts on what you're missing and when we might expect some further updates. Probably ought to make sure you're on the mic, just so people can.
I just want to make sure you received the Excel spreadsheet with the teacher evaluation information that I sent on Friday.
I believe so. Did you send it directly to me?
No, I sent it to Bob Guffin.
Okay. Okay.
Okay.
So can you give me an overview, since we haven't seen that, and let us know what was in there and what you're still working on?
Sure. Let's see. We had under goal data, what we were waiting on specifically, there was some information on the board certified teachers and what their rankings were, effective, highly effective. Not all of that information was captured. Some of it was, so that is in one of the tabs on the spreadsheet. We're also waiting on some the compensation model data, and then also some just the information on enrollment and completion for the AP, IB, and CTE. I believe we should have that all by next week, but as far as firm data numbers go, that's what we put in for request. We did receive much of it back already, and that was included in that Excel spreadsheet.
Okay. So what are we? Where do you think, Claire and Bob? What else do we need?
So we knew for goal one, which is all the academic data, and when the plan was adopted this summer, we had the 12-13. Which specifically on goal one, that's all academic data.
Okay, and I just received, I didn't get the specific scorecard until just yesterday that had everything broken down. I'd created a spreadsheet based
Mhm.
on the information I was originally provided with. So the detailed one I just received yesterday, and I'll make sure that we get that all in.
Have a fully populated.
I believe by the end of next week, as far as data that the DOE has. Now, some of those items look like they were up for interpretation, and as those are discussed, we can get data requests. So what's been requested is based on what I have seen for specific data points. That doesn't mean that every single project is going to have data populated in there. If it's just simply not available, or if it's ambiguously worded, I have not put in a request. So most of it was, again, around teacher evaluation, that goal 2, and then our CTE and AP completion and enrollment. So that's what's been put into, requested to our data division. There's been other information gathered, which I put in that scorecard, such as for family-friendly schools, the survey that's been sent out, and that kind of information that wouldn't be considered such hard data.
Some of our projects
Thanks for your good work. I have a few questions on the interpretation of what we mean. What's your plan to seek out a clear interpretation so you can
That's a great question, and I didn't know if you were just tackling the scorecard item by item, and as they came up when they were on the agenda, if you would like to do it that way, or if you would like to communicate through board staff and have them provide that to me so I could submit those data requests. Again, I'm very leery of interpreting anything on behalf of the board. As far as that data goes that I mentioned that I can provide, I think by next week that's reasonable, but I just wanted to make sure that you understand that that does not mean a fully populated scorecard.
So you'll work with our staff in getting the interpretation clarified so you can move forward.
Mm-hmm.
Second question deals with, you mentioned data unavailable through DOE records systems. What's your plan for acquiring that kind of information?
If it's just information that is not collected and the board members wish to have that, that's also something that we need to have discussions around. We have to see if there are directives to do so, or if it's even possible, because of course we want you to understand when data collections occur, why it's collected, and if it's not even possible for some reason to do so, or if it's something that's not collected, that obviously needs to be discussed and understood.
So you come back to the chair or to the committee or to our staff with a list of items that are not currently collected by DOE, and then discuss that with us. And then we can make a determination at that point whether or not to pursue it or how to pursue it.
Sure, if that's the board's wish that that's proceed, we'll do it that way.
At least that's my wish. I'm
Okay.
not sure that's the board's wish. I'll let the chair
I think it makes
speak.
sense.
Okay.
You know?
Yeah, it does make sense.
I mean, for me, the goal would be to have the scorecard populated as much as possible,
Sure, oh,
as soon
certainly.
as possible,
Right.
so that this committee, as well as the board, can know kind of where we stand, what's still missing, and we can identify where the areas are and what we need to do to populate it. The goal being having a fully populated scorecard as soon as we can allows us to continue to track those metrics
Mhm.
on a going forward basis we've identified as being key metrics.
Okay.
So,
And at this point, I think it's mostly populated from the DOE standpoint for what we have, what I provided on Friday. But if you wish not even to review it until it's fully populated, then we'll go ahead and send that out again, the goal being next week.
yeah, I mean, I would say let's go ahead and send out when you feel like the DOE has fully populated what it can populate. And then we can identify where there are areas that we need to discuss further and
Sure, it'll be populated and along with corresponding documents that are relevant. Okay.
Thank you.
Personally, I would like, I think maybe sending it out to the committee members, just so we can review it.
Sure.
And I think with the goal of sending it out to the full board for our next meeting, I think our planning committee meeting is the day after. So let's do it for the full board, just so everyone can see it. We can push the ball forward, and then if we need to tweak anything at our committee meeting, and then we'll have a full board feedback as well. Great. DJ, did you have anything else to add?
No, I'm good.
Okay. Great. So the next agenda item on the balanced scorecard is the balanced scorecard priority metrics. And the committee needs to come up with a short list of no more than 3 to 5 high-level targets that we can easily track and monitor over time. For example, targets under the prior State Board of Education were 90, 25, 90. That is 90% of students will pass the ISTEP Plus in math and English language arts. 25% of graduates will have a transferable indicator of college and career readiness. For example, passing scores on the AP and IB exams, dual credit, et cetera. And 90% of students would graduate from high school. As you will see, these targets were reflected in the A to F system metrics adopted by the previous SBOE. The targets need to bring together and summarize the board's strategic plan, and then should be reflected in the important work we do in K through 12 education. For this part of the committee's work, I'd like to hear from each committee member about what these high-level targets should be. Remember, we don't need to make more than, we don't want more than 5 targets. We will discuss and then vote on a recommendation for what we wish to achieve. This should draw upon our 3 strategic plan goals. I think did we not discuss this a little bit at our last committee meeting? Right. And we went through and circled our.
Right. At the last meeting, didn't we identify 2 or 3 priorities? And in reflecting on those priorities since the last meeting, I'm very comfortable recommend.
So those were the projects, those were the indicators, but it wasn't specific targets. So for example, 90% or something that's objective that we can actually track. So would you like to talk about that now? Would you like us, staff, actually take that under advisement and try to come up with a recommendation? What do you recommend?
My personal sense is that you make a recommendation to us, and hopefully more committee members will be here, so it's not two people making a decision for the whole committee. So that's my personal preference.
So we'll bring it back to the December 4th.
Yeah, I think that'll help too with our minutes, since our minutes were not prepared yet. I think it'll help us as everyone reviews those minutes to refresh everyone's collective memory on what exactly each committee member set as their indicators, and help influence as we right,
Prior-
right.
So we still have some work to do. And we need to give guidance. We don't want to do that for you.
Yeah,
All
I
right,
think
so
that
we'll bring
sounds
that
good.
back to December 4th.
Next agenda item, priority initiatives, teacher and principal evaluation systems and stakeholder engagement. So first, we're going to get the status of stakeholder engagement recommendations from staff. So I would invite Bob Guffin to provide an update to the committee, and then invite the listed speakers on the agenda to present to the committee.
One of the things that the committee asked was that we make some recommendations for what stakeholder groups should be involved in providing feedback to us. And you asked that we bring those to you for you to make a determination about, yes, that's the group we want to be involved or not. And so we have, we're recommending that the Indiana Association of School Principals, the Indiana School Boards Association, and the Superintendent's Association are groups, in addition to a group called Ambassador Teacher Group. And we, Mr. Koopman couldn't be here today, so we thought that we would bring them before you, let them tell you what process they might choose to use, and then have you bless their work and have them go forth and do the work. So we'd like to bring forward, is Erica? Suzanne Witten and Erica Haskins from the Ambassador Teacher Group to explain what process they might use as in their ability to bring feedback to you. So,
Bob, I have a question about the groups that you just named. Is this a complete list that you're recommending to us, or are there other groups? I noticed there aren't any parent groups involved or any community groups.
we can.
And I understand there's probably hundreds
Yeah.
of these groups, and so I'm not recommending you add groups. I'm just trying to understand why these groups and not others, such as parents.
We can certainly go to wherever you wish for us to find groups. Now, we've had conversations with the Indiana PTA Association, and they could possibly have some interest, but we'll go wherever you need us to go to find those groups.
One of the groups we talked about were business leaders coming forward and providing corporate resources for us to implement strategic resources to assist in implementing the plan. I would ask that you take that back and talk to staff about whether or not we're still going to pursue that. I strongly urge that we do that with some CEOs.
Great, we can do that. So let's bring Suzanne and Erica up, and they'll tell you the process they might use, and then you can ask them any questions you want.
Morning.
Good morning.
I'm Erica Haskins. I spoke to you in August, and I learned very quickly, if you tell the State Board of Education that you have an idea, and then they connect you to Bob Guffin, you get a whole lot of work that you didn't expect you're going to get. But I'm really excited to be here today and with my partner, Suzanne. So we're going to present essentially the teacher stakeholder group that we have formed to solicit the feedback that you are seeking. And we put a couple things together just for you to hold on to and look at. So first, I think what I'll do is describe our process for and our thinking around the formation of the group and go into what we've developed so far. Of course, we're open to feedback and redesigning the group that we have, but this is kind of our planning stages. So really, we put a lot of time, first and foremost, into what are the essential traits that we want to be possessed by all group members in the teacher stakeholder group. And those are bullet pointed right there above. And those were the key indicators that we were seeking as we reached out in our own personal networks so that we could get a good representation across the state. Obviously, we're located in central Indiana, and we really wanted to broaden our scope. And then second, as we communicated out to those individuals that we thought possessed those essential traits, we made expectations for time commitment to see that they would really be able to engage in the process in the way that we needed them to do, and they had the capacity to do so. So in doing so, we were able to form a list of about 30 educators. We're really excited to engage in a conversation. And so we wanted, because we're proud, we think that there's room for improvement, but we're proud of the distribution that we have across elementary and secondary educators, the type of school that they teach at, and the perspective that they would bring. And then also across content areas, I think if there was an area for improvement, that it would be to get a better distribution in some of the content areas. Suzanne and I agreed that we don't have a good representation from those that specifically serve in special education roles, and also those that serve in some of the special areas or the career and technical ed. And I think that that's a very important perspective to have as you solicit some of this feedback, particularly around evaluation. I think that they get left out of the conversation. So there is room for growth there, but otherwise everyone is represented. And then we're also really excited about, again, where we've reached around the state. So that's the group that has been formed. Now let's talk about, I'll tell you about our thoughts. Our thoughts for moving forward and engaging in the conversation. I think really what we're looking for now is guidance from you and TNTP around some of the discussion points you would like for this group to engage in so that we can get the rich feedback that helps you the most and organize it in a way that is helpful. And we also have a plan in place to pretty efficiently schedule groups of, I would say, 6 to 8 individuals. It's going to be collaborating virtually around a conversation on the talking points that you ask us to address for about 90 minutes to get some of that feedback. So we've made sure to open up windows early in the morning as well as evening time so that, again, educators that have differing schedules, that have coaching or extracurricular activities can all engage. And also have plenty of time to have a meaningful discussion. So I think that that's where we're ready to go. Suzanne, do you have anything to add?
I have a little typing ready for you.
Well, first we'd like to say thank you for meeting with us today. It's really important to make sure that we put teachers forefront in education right now. During my year of service as Indiana Teacher of the Year, the 2 things that I cherish most about my experience, and that's supporting teacher leaders within our schools or districts in the state and wholeheartedly listening to their creative and innovative ideas and their feedback. Have been through some rigorous evaluations through their districts and their communities, and they're great leaders within their classrooms. They're qualified educators that proven themselves, and they've dedicated themselves to their profession and are able to give the board their honest feedback, or I like to say straight talk, without a filter from any organization or any special interest group, but instead that will support what's best for all of our children in Indiana and our teachers. So I'm actually really excited to work with Erica on this powerful mission that she's created in promoting teacher voice. So we would like to really help the committee on topics as the teacher evaluations, accountability, school improvement strategies, in any way possible. Anything you need from us, we would like to help you with. So I hope this creative and innovative idea created by one of our very own Indiana teachers is able to be put in action.
Thank you very much. I'm excited to have this group put together, and I know a lot of work's gone into it, so thank you for your efforts today.
Yeah, thanks for your work. This is terrific. We need to hear directly from teachers, as you pointed out, directly to the board without filters of any kind through any other kind of organization. This is a really important step forward in our work. You mentioned that you're going to be receiving some topics or issues that we would send forward to you for input. I would hope that you would also stimulate and generate and initiate your own issues that you see. We have a pretty full agenda and a pretty full plate of different things we're working on. But sometimes a teacher issue doesn't come before us unless we're looking at rules or law or whatever it may be. So I would hope that you would identify some key issues that you feel that we should take some leadership on and send those forward also.
Got it.
How is communication going to work if we, for example, ask you to comment on a specific topic? Are you going to bring together your group and then send us in writing some kind of information? And would you follow up in person if necessary? Is that the way we're going to communicate back and forth?
I think that would be great. I think that for any topic that you're going to initiate, we would want about 2 to 3 weeks of work time. Because I think that for a group this size, maybe even a little bit larger, that you would want to open up about 4 windows of conversation, opportunities for educators to engage in conversations. And so that just requires time for people to open that up in their schedule. So that's what I see as a realistic timeline to get the kind of feedback that you want from a particular topic.
So we would have to plan that into the schedule. If a topic's coming up, we need to inform them of what's coming up. I heard you identify a few issues. One issue was teacher evaluation, obviously, huge issue we're going to be dealing with. And also teacher leadership, which we've talked about, and it is in our plan, but we really haven't put any meat to that particular topic. So I would hope that you would start to move in that area. Some of us have a long background in education, so I can remember 20, 30 years ago talking about teacher leadership, differentiated roles, and how that all works. And there's all kinds of exciting models. And for one, I'd really like to pursue that. I think there's a lot of talent in the teaching force that could really catapult schools in new and innovative ways. So I'll be looking for something like teacher leadership.
And I would just add to that, we heard last month from Dr. Harding Murphy and Dr. Sandy Cole from IU, and I just thought their presentation was fascinating and would love to get some feedback from you as to putting a little meat on those bones as to the survey results and how we can improve some of those metrics so that I think there's better understanding about what we're trying to accomplish and what the mission is and how we're using some of these metrics in teacher effectiveness or in teacher evaluation, that is. Because I think there was a little bit of a disconnect. That was a big takeaway for me. If you look at the survey results, the drop off between superintendents and principals and then teachers in how teachers can they be effectively measured? What are the things that go into that? I think it was very interesting. And so I think it would be helpful for your group to help better inform us and the board and all those interested as to why some of those metrics are. Go ahead, Bob.
Daniel Shockey has some comments about another teacher group that
Sure.
that might want to contribute.
Okay, great.
Podium. So as a part of the U.S. waiver application, you may remember this part in Principle 3, which is around educator effectiveness. It actually called for a stakeholder group. And so my concern is that we've identified the same group of people. So our group is actually coming together today at 3 o'clock for the first time to discuss these exact same issues. And they are the Millikan Award winners, the Teachers of the Year, the National Board Certified Teachers, and department staff and educator effectiveness. So I just want to, and this is a collaborative effort with our current teacher of the year, Steve Perkins, the superintendent, and others. So again, I want to make sure that we're not tasking the same teachers out of the classroom time to come and do the same kind of work. So if there's questions that we can fold into our process, 2 groups, again, I just want us to be aware that we are asking kind of the same identified group of people to come together to have the same conversations.
More input, the better.
That's perfect. I just want to make sure
that's
maybe
great.
if
Is our
they-
staff involved in those meetings also? I want to be sure our board staff is. Bob, are you invited to this meeting and will be part of it?
No.
Is
And
it possible
Chancellor-
for Bob to participate?
Sure, if he wants
representing
to,
us?
if he can.
I think it's important that someone from the board
Mm-hmm.
be there. As board members, we have other lives, so to
Sure.
speak.
And I would hope that, I would just hope
And-
reciprocally, the group they just described, that department staff would be included.
Can we all work together?
That's what I'm hoping for. But the fact that this exists, and this is news to us today, that this new body is going to exist, had we collaborated ahead of time, we probably could have avoided duplication of invitations. Like I said, our group has known for quite some time they were coming together today at 3 o'clock. So I would, for the exact same reason, I completely agree with you.
Yeah, our goal is always to bring people together and to staffs working together
Right.
on issues. So anytime we can do that, we should do that in collaboration.
Mhm.
And so that's my opinion on that.
I agree. Thank
Yeah,
you, sir.
I think we don't want to be bureaucratic about it and
Mhm.
have 2 groups doing exactly the same work. So the more coordination that we can have,
Correct.
the better. And, I would like to just understand real quickly what is on your agenda today.
Sure.
Just so we can,
Yeah, absolutely. Sarah, do you mind speaking to the agenda today? And I think you all have met Sarah Pease before. She
Yes.
works with Risa Renee in educator effectiveness.
Hi, Sarah.
Good
morning.
On our agenda today, it's really introductions, get to know each other. We're also going to look at Arizona. They are one of the lead states right now in teacher leadership. There was an article that came out from the Teacher Quality Center on why Arizona teachers leadership rocks, and they have about 15 exhibits that they have over just what they've been doing with teacher leaders in Arizona. So we're going to do a lot of brainstorming sessions on what can Indiana's exhibits look like. It's doing it well, and let's look at that. Also, the teacher equality plan that's we need to be revising in June 2015. We're just going to kind of brainstorm on that as well. We've got some data pulled, and then looking at what we have currently now, and then what the feds are asking us to revise and get their feedback on that. So that's really the agenda for today.
My statement about collaborating, I'm not condoning that we bring the 2 groups together. I think it's really important to have the 2 groups distinct, working on potentially overlapping issues or maybe distinct issues. And my concept of collaboration is just that we are kept informed about what each group is doing. So again, I'm not recommending bringing those 2 groups together, but somehow communicating back and forth and be part of it, because it is an official DOE committee, right?
yeah, I
Thank
think
you.
they can have different, we want to minimize the overlap,
Sure.
but there might be issues where there are overlap. Who all or how many teachers are involved?
We have actually 3 teachers of the year, 2 Milkins, and 2 national board certified teachers. So this is just the first small brainstorming group to kind of get everybody's voices heard and then kind of move out from there.
Will you be inviting board members to attend these meetings?
We definitely
On
can.
occasion, if we're in town or we're close by and we receive an agenda in advance, if you're talking about teacher leadership, I'd love to be, I'm sure other committee members want to be on specific topics as listeners, not advocates, or
Sure.
we tend to talk a lot sometimes. So I just want to be sure we don't take it over, but just to listen directly from some award-winning teachers. So if you can get those agendas out to us, at least maybe a week or 2 in advance, that'd be helpful.
No
Yeah,
problem.
I'd just say
Yeah.
coordinate with staff.
Okay.
Right.
The staffs can coordinate and then shoot them our way and be better informed.
No problem. Thanks.
Super,
Thank you.
thanks, Sarah.
Todd Bess has worked with us in several different areas, and he's from the Indiana Association of
Good morning, everybody. How are you today? Good. Good. Now that we've warmed up from the cold. So Todd Bess, Executive Director with Indiana Association of School Principals, certainly present for state board meetings and to enjoy those with you. We've done a lot of different things, I guess I would say it that way, over the last couple of years involved in teacher evaluations. When everything really changed, I looked to my board. They said, be involved. Early we need, so we've several different things. Recently, I would highlight, and Gordon, you mentioned this too, the INTAS publication, presentation. We've been a part of that, and I think there's a letter being developed to say, here's where we think things could be developed further, and an approach to looking at teacher evaluations across the state, and we support that as well. It strikes me we've got a lot of data on teacher evaluations. More is coming, but really that's one big data set. So making informed decisions about where we're going really needs more data. You're doing that now. That data set will provide more. So I appreciate you taking the time to look at those kinds of things. In terms of how we can help, I guess I would point to maybe several things we've done or things that we will do in the future. As an association, we have an executive committee of about 6 people, president, vice president, and so forth. And we have, I guess at one point, met with CECI staff to discuss evaluations and what we felt were important. So we've kind of provided that feedback directly to them. Individually, I meet monthly with Danielle Shockey and Bob Guffin. So that can be part of that conversation. And then we've recently tried to establish also that we have an advisory committee. We have 12 districts across the state, geographic districts. So each of them contributes a person, principal, to that committee that's loosely termed Superintendent's Advisory, meant to meet with DOE. They wanted to become more involved, so I've reached out to Danielle and to Bob, and then kind of on a quarterly basis, then that group will be meeting formally with both entities. So they could be involved, give guidance. Obviously, they're in the field, they're doing those kinds of things. This isn't necessarily a legislative issue yet. We'll see where that goes. But we also have a 12-member legislative committee. Again, same kind of a makeup that could be involved however you want in terms of getting feedback. Going forward, all of those districts meet fall, winter, spring. And so that ranges from 20 to 25 people. Actually in District 2, Dr. Freitas, where you're at, we had about 70 last February. So if there's a desire for direct communication with a large number of people, those presidents of those districts are always looking for topics, programs, especially if we can help inform and give direct feedback. We'd love to do it in that fashion. In Indiana, there's the Indiana Principals Leadership Institute, formed recently out of the General Assembly. 2 different cohorts. I won't describe all of that. Kind of an outgrowth of that, and certainly they're focused on teacher evaluations, practicing experienced principals. Kind of an outgrowth of that is IASP has always done a new administrators conference, day and a half, getting people up to speed in the summer. We've expanded that to be a 2-year process involving mentoring, much like IPLI, and one focus of that was teacher evaluations. So we conducted training in the summer. In the regional meetings, they have support from their mentors over teacher evaluations, and then each of their seminars that we go through, there's also continuing support in that way. So that's another opportunity that we try to become involved and give direction. And a shameless plug, I would say also, that the Principals Conference is coming up on administrators from across the state, assistants, principals, districts, administration, to be here in Indianapolis. And breakfast time and the lunchtime are great informal ways to have conversations. So there'll be formal concurrent sessions on teacher evaluations, using data, those kinds of things. So just make ourselves available to you in whatever way you'd like. So those are my comments. I'm welcome to answer questions or get your input on what else we can do for you.
Great.
Attention whether it's appropriate.
Can you ask that again, please?
Todd, are there rural principals on your committee? For the sometimes concerns of rural principals are different than those from large corporations. I don't know if it's the capacity to do those things, as well as the concerns are probably different in small communities than they are in large communities.
I think this question dealt with the differences between large school corporations and small school corporations and their needs and their interests and their insights. How do you accommodate those variances?
I think the challenges that those district sizes have experienced in a larger district, there's some additional support time, maybe from a central office person, not necessarily a dedicated person, but it's involved in their overall duties to provide further guidance to principals, checking on their evaluation processes, called alignment between the administrators, and helping drive professional development for the district because they really can see 8 elementaries, 3 middle schools, 2 high schools, however that looks. I know the data that was presented from INTAS talked about teacher perceptions, principal perceptions. And I think that's what makes the system better when we get those conversations together and then we find how do we drive that professional development. In a small district, to his question, I'm thinking corporations across the state, superintendent, 4 principals, that kind of a setup, that's difficult to do and have that kind of a scope of professional development. And I think that's where, as a state, we've got to find the resources around to help both, but maybe primarily the small schools. BJ, does that help answer that question?
Absolutely. I'll piggyback on that one with another one. How can we better communicate with principals and teachers? When there's concerns, and I can have individual conversations with teachers and principals, they seem to better understand and become much more comfortable with what the end goal is. I think sometimes they almost feel attacked, which has never ever been the case. And once they understand, I think everyone seems to relax and get on board. And in order for this strategic plan to work, we have to have everybody invested moving in the same direction. And I think the communication is the key to that. And I know that that's probably much simpler in large corporations, but in small corporations, it's pretty difficult to have a single person whose one job is to go in and make sure that everyone understands exactly what we're doing and why we're doing it. And how can the state help in that?
In terms of a communication network, obviously you've got the Department of Ed's different pieces, DOE dialogue, those kinds of things. From a principal's perspective, I would highlight those district meetings that we talked about. We also do a weekly communication, so I'm glad to always take anything in that nature and push that out on a Friday basis to our members. That can be something that we can work on. Just off the top of my head, that's 2 ways to help develop that communication for you.
Okay, thank you.
Spend a lot of time talking with principals and teachers, and one of the issues that comes up often is teacher evaluation. And it seems that every person I talk to has a different impression of what the teacher evaluation system's all about. And my conclusion is that it's usually related to a school corporation. The school corporation has done a good job in implementing teacher evaluation. The teachers and principals are saying, yes, it really works, it really helps. Other school corporations are not at that same level. So there's a lot of negativity about evaluation, not by virtue of a policy or the law, but by virtue of the implementation of it. Is that, you're saying correct, is that something you hear along the way, and have you sort of made that same conclusion that I have? It seems to be school corporation specific.
I would agree with that. As everything changed, I'll just say it that way, several years ago, our recommendation to our members was, so this is a great opportunity to do some things. However, this is when you also extend yourself even more. Call it either through discussion or involvement, those kinds of tangible actions, so that they have that better sense of this is what an evaluation process is about. And that's where I think some of the in-task work can help advise us and show some of those things. As I talked about it, there's where we need to make sure in terms of data, always look at your data. We need to be confident that those that were reporting a disconnect are those in the same districts as the principal saying we're confident that we have a good process going forward. And that wasn't necessarily the intent of that data survey. So I think we need to better align ourselves, because if truly it is, I as a principal think I'm a great evaluator, I give you great feedback, and the three things I asked you to do for professional development are what you need, and the teacher on the other hand is saying he hasn't a clue, then that's the process breakdown that we've got to fix.
I really don't see that disconnect. When I talk to a principal that says it's working, the teachers usually say it's working.
I would agree.
And so that alignment is there, and you see the same thing. So I would hope we seem to do a lot of statewide things in Indiana. We have conferences, which is really important for networking and so forth. But maybe this is a DOE question, that maybe we need to target certain school corporations that are having more difficulty in implementing teacher evaluation, for example. Not to pick them out or to pick on them, but to provide some substantive assistance that is tailored and directed to their particular need. Because there's many school corporations where it's working really effectively, and we should be highlighting those and celebrating those. But there's some other school corporations we really need to pinpoint. And so I think you would agree with that statement, and maybe DOE needs to reconsider a different approach. Might want to come up, so those.
Received. So for example, where they had a lot of high NAs, let's say, and what they
Right.
turned into us in terms of their teacher evaluation, those schools were identified for what we would consider a monitoring visit and a collaboration for how maybe we can better serve them. So some professional development personalized to their school situation. And so Sarah she's actually has the team that's doing those visits and has already started those. They're receiving written feedback, a collaboration conversation, and then follow up to if the feedback we were able to give and the ideas shared. So we base that on, again, kind of what you said, look to the districts who may be having some challenges in terms of implementation.
I would hope to receive some of that information in a non-public way. I'm curious about the success
Sure.
of that, and I don't really need to know the specific school corporations.
We're happy to
But
share that
this-
in a private way if you'd like for the board.
This intervention process is one I think we're going to have to use in multiple areas, not only teacher evaluation. But some of the negative comments I hear sometimes, I align it back to a school corporation that is having implementation problems. So I'm really happy to hear DOE has taken the initiatives, but would want to follow up with you on how effective this is, whether or not school corporations are changing. I'm finding sometimes it's a leadership issue at the top. It could be the school board. I see Sarah nodding. It's not a teacher issue. It's not a principal issue. It's a school board issue, or it's other leadership issues. Maybe they disagree with the law. And I tend to tell them there's some non-negotiables in life, and if it's a law, it's a non-negotiable. So let's get on with it. Stop fighting it for 2, 3, 4, 10 years. And so I think that examining that, analyzing that, so kids can grow, teachers can grow, school principals can grow, to get their leadership sort of out of the way. I'm not sure how we do that, but it begins by at least finding out which school corporations are having these issues. So
And I
thanks
think
for
what we can share would be the identified list and why we chose those schools for the visits, as well as an example of
super. And the end product. What happened?
Sure.
No names, no, nothing on that.
We may have to wait on the end product a little bit as we just got started with the schools, but we'd happy to stay in contact.
Super. Last question I have for you, since we've had you up here for a long time. We talked about the other topic is teacher leadership that was generated by our teachers this morning. And so from a school principal's perspective, what's your notion of teacher leadership? Are you willing to share some of the leadership of a school with teachers?
Absolutely. There's a lot of teacher leadership out there that's willing to step up. They don't want to do it necessarily in that formal administrative way.
Correct.
That's not their role. Yet we see, called almost every school across the state probably now has some sort of a professional learning community. So there's that PLC leader. There's a department chair leader. Some of them are doing evaluations. So yeah, we've got to reach into that midst. And my experience and having been in several school systems, when that teacher leadership is evident and is strong, whether they're seeking administrative careers or they're just willing to step up and lead, that really takes soul burden from that office and makes it a shared burden for the school. I would comment that through the Principals Leadership Institute, in year 2, those principals bring 2 teacher leaders from their building to share in the process, and so that school improvement planning process moves forward. In the principals' world, they will change. Things happen like that, but that we can get that teacher leadership and the culture of that school open to how that's done, that will make the difference.
Many quality teachers throughout the state of Indiana. And I always try to get them into the principalship program at IU. And sometimes they bite, sometimes they don't. But many say, I love teaching. I don't want to leave the classroom, but I want to contribute in a leadership kind of way. So we need to work with schools and school corporations on how to be sure that opportunity is there.
Agreed. Thanks for your
Thank
time.
you.
We're glad to help.
So I think next up is Brian Smith. Brian?
Good morning.
Morning.
Thanks for inviting me. I'm the executive director of the Indiana School Boards Association, about 45 days into my position. But I also have 30 years experience as a superintendent. Prior to that, a high school principal, and prior to that, a trade and industrial teacher, and taught science also. I kind of begin with the end in mind here in my comment, and that is, as we work with school boards, school boards across the state, we do a lot of professional development with them. And recently, I got an opportunity to travel across the entire state and talk with several hundred board members in our regional meetings. And of course, I get a lot of feedback during that process. And a common question is, what should the focus of a school board be? And as you can imagine, it ranges from getting involved in things that maybe they shouldn't be involved in to really focusing on the right things. Well, what are the right things? Obviously, hiring the superintendent and evaluating the superintendent are pretty critical. But beyond that, doing the strategic plan, having a vision for the school district, and that vision needs to encompass student performance and providing the resources in order to accomplish that. And so they need to be very aware of how students are performing. They need to be able to look at the data and know where they're doing really well and where they're not doing so well. And then beyond that, to look at the school improvement plans and see if they truly reflect what the data are showing them. And then beyond that, of course, there is the budget aspect to making sure they maintain fiscal integrity. Those are the big rocks. And if you stay focused on those, that really takes up a lot of your time as you know, this board. And so when they ask, well, what should our main function be? This is it. It's all about student learning. All of the rest of this feeds into that. I would suggest, having recently come from the superintendency in a very large district, and thinking about the teacher evaluation process, we put a lot of time into training and working with teachers and working with administrators. I'm not so sure we put as much time into working with superintendents. And maybe I was guilty of maybe not taking the amount of time necessary. But I evaluated several of my principals. I really needed to make sure there was consistency. The evaluation system is only as good as the person that's doing the evaluating and using it effectively to help teachers improve. If I'm going to evaluate that person that is doing the evaluations, I need to be just aware and actually almost a master evaluator to be able to model what they're doing. And so maybe that's an area where we could put a little bit more effort into ensuring the people at the very top become very proficient in the process and can help others that are doing the evaluations really focus on the right things. And I get a bit confused when I look at the RISE models that are out there. Pure RISE, the modified RISE, TAP, R. Wow, I mean, you can't become an expert in everything. And so my hat's off to the people that are going out and doing the audits, because you literally have to, I suppose you look at Public Law 90 and see if you're hitting all of the benchmarks in terms of complying with what the law requires. And just from my point of view, it looks like there's 4 tiers that we tend to focus on. Teacher effectiveness rubric, which is pretty critical. But then there's also the student learning objectives, building performance, and then also student growth. Those are the 4 pieces that need to fit into the evaluation model. So the other thing I would bring up is that frustrated some folks in the evaluation process, not only teachers but administrators, was the timing of release of performance information, not only for the building but for the students, and how that all fit together with the evaluation process and any merit money that might be involved in that, and that caused some consternation. That all needs to fit together. Now, the other piece that I picked up in talking with board members is they say, well, look, we know that our buildings are going to be evaluated. And heretofore, we've used a grading system, and I know you're working on a new grading system. And board members have said to me, look, if my building, our high school, gets a B and doesn't get an A, this system needs to be transparent enough that I can go out to my constituents and say, here's what happened. This is the problem. I looked at the data. Right now, I think that gets a little bit blurred for them. It's a little more difficult to understand. Is the growth of the student going to be that individual student growth, but then is it going to be tempered with a peer group? And you know, the longer you talk about this, you see the eyes glaze over. And this is a real conundrum for you, I know that. We want it to be simple, and yet it's probably not a simple thing to do. So, I don't have any answers for that, but I am parroting what board members have said, is that we need to be able to go out and explain to people why we got the grade. It needs to be easy enough to understand. We didn't do well here, and this is why, and this is our plan to fix that. That's a board member's function, to represent the community, to ensure that students are doing well. And so that anything that we can do to assist with that process, we would be glad to step up. But that's the feedback that I've gotten from board members across the state in talking with them and working with them. I've got to tell you, I came from a board that said we really like the idea of evaluating every teacher of every year. But I'll also tell you this. I can walk into a building and ask a principal to name their 3 worst performing teachers. And they can tell me who they are without hesitation. There needs to be the ability to spend more time with those people than those that are my highest performing teachers, because I could probably name them also. And that needs to be tempered. And that flexibility needs to be built into the system so we can spend more time in trying to bring up those that need the help and reinforce those that are at the top end. The other piece, I know this has been mentioned, that is frustrating. Some school systems run pretty lean. I had several schools with 900 kids and 1 principal and no assistant. That's a lot of evaluating to do, particularly if you hold true to the RISE model. You still have parents that you need to meet with, correspond to. You still have a building to run. And so this all needs to fit together. We didn't have the luxury of hiring specialists to come in and assist, but sometimes teachers need modeling to say, here, let me show you how this is done. Do the job right. So thought about maybe adding some resources to help with that process would be. So those are my comments. I'd be glad to answer any questions.
Appreciate your comments and your interest in working with us in this strategic planning document. I was really gratified to hear the real focus on student performance, student achievement, that really is driving school districts, and everything else should support that endeavor. So I really appreciate that as a board member. Regarding the teacher evaluations, I put in a few more. Some things you said today, I don't think the entire board has heard before from a school board perspective. So I would hope this is the beginning of many times that you will provide input to us. The notion of the A through F system, we've heard some issues there, but the notion of having and empowering local school board people have some kind of diagnostic information, transparent information that they can go back and share with that community. It makes absolute sense, and sometimes I think there's a war on common sense, because it is common sense, but we haven't thought about it. And so the more we engage people like yourself, I see really valuable. And it's such an important ingredient that we should have thought of that before. So again, my point, again, is to have you come back, provide input either in writing or directly orally, if that's okay.
Absolutely.
And again, as you hold these various sessions around the state, if you can work through our staff, provide some dates. If you're in the 2nd Congressional District and I'm available, I'll certainly attend. And I think some of my committee members and board members would be interested in hearing directly from board members. So hopefully,
That's a great suggestion.
hopefully you can share those schedules, and our schedules are jammed right now, but sometimes we've got a glimmer of an hour or 2 hours we can invest in meeting with various people.
Excellent. I like that suggestion. Thank you.
I'm interested in hearing a little bit more on your point related to timing of release of the performance data as it links up with the evaluation process and merit pay. Could you elaborate on that?
Well, when you develop the system, and part of it depends on the school performance and the individual student growth. If you do your evaluations during the year, but the student performance data comes out quite a bit later, you have to hold up this component until you get the other piece of that, and the same with the school grade. And so, in one sense, we're enticing people to do a better job with a bit of a reward if they're able to accomplish their goals. But when you have that hiccup and then it stops, now you've started a new year and you're into a new evaluation process, but you really haven't completed this one. It kind of blurs it a little bit. And you've done this year. You've now planned for the new year. You've written a new improvement plan. Your focus now is on some new things, but you've still got this to complete over here. And so it would be nice to have that all end at the end of a learning season and not have those carryovers. I guess I'm kind of a concrete sequential, and I like to get a job completed, and then I like to start fresh and say, okay, now where are we going? You know, we've done what we've done.
Can I follow up on that? So what would be the ideal timeline, working from the end back? When do you think it would be appropriate for a school district to receive those grades on?
And by the end of the school year.
By the end of the school year?
Yes. And I tell you, I think the feedback I get from board members and parents, they kind of feel the same way. You know, that's kind of the culmination. We're
Right, it's a
finishing up.
closing activity.
What did it look like? How many highly effective, you know, that process. But people are watching that more closely than ever and holding us accountable. And that's focusing on the right things. It's just incumbent on us to make it look like we've got it all together in making that happen.
Right. We're trying to overcome the war on common sense. So. Claire, you had a
Back to
comment?
that again.
I so appreciate hearing that, having lived through the A3F panel for more than a year. And the conundrum that we face is that
Sure.
we are required in law, and educators want individual student growth to be in our accountability system. That growth is calculated off of the ISTEP data, which doesn't get back from the rescore from the vendor until August 31st. So the tests are administered in the spring. You get the final data August 31st this year. Then you send that out to schools. You give them an appeals process. Then you have to calculate the grades. And so it doesn't come out until the fall. So that's absolutely correct. You don't get the information you need to get your final information to do the evaluations until well into the start of the next school year. And that's just the way that the flow of information happens now. Now, through the RFP process for a new testing vendor, one of the things I believe that we've asked is how much more quickly can we get that information so that we can at least move it up a little bit.
That seems to me to be a no-brainer, you know, and I totally appreciate your point, you know, to be planning for the new school year, to have your mindset, you know, you've already put together your program, and then you're getting feedback from last year. It seems like a disconnect.
We wouldn't want to move the test here. That doesn't make any kind of sense. So it seems the point, no return, is how long it takes for the testing company to come back. How long is our appeal process, by the way? It seems like that goes
It's
on
very
forever.
short. It's only 2 weeks long. I mean, that's how long you have to appeal your grade. And so you have to be really quick to identify any issues and submit the required information to get an appeal heard. Now, schools will get the individual ISTEP scores prior to the retest data in July, and then that's when they submit the request for any rescores, and that's when you get it back from the vendor at the very end of August. And then that begins the process for conducting the appeals.
Why does it take so long to get that information? And
Part
I'm
of it
happy
is
to hear
because you
from
don't just have like a multiple choice test, you also have the writing and other things that has to be scored, and that all takes time. So there's actually different components to the test. Some can be automatically, fairly automatically done, but others cannot. It's the nature of our test.
I understand we're going to be selecting a vendor, testing. There's some questions related to who's going to be making that decision on the vendor. Is that a decision for the State Board of Education to make, or is that happening somewhere else?
Per the request from Dr. Oliver, our council is talking to the DOE's general counsel. The Department of Administration oversees procurement, and it's their rules and the statutes governing procurement that we have to work within.
I think it's really important the State Board make that decision. Procurement does a great job in procuring things, but this is a highly technical issue and one that is serious for a number of schools in Indiana. So we need to be part of that and advocate for a vendor who can provide data in a much shorter time frame. And I couldn't agree with you more.
Thank you.
BJ, did you have any questions for Brian?
No, that's it. my only comment would be that I would have to agree. I don't know that it's physically possible to get those test results by the end of the school year, which I agree would be amazing to have. Then you have all summer to kind of review on what you need to improve on as a school and as a teacher. I know that the state aligns, I have so many standards I have to cover. And those standards, but some of those are deemed critical. With maps, curriculum maps, I'm assuming most corporations have curriculum maps. I'm not sure that the test date couldn't be moved up some to buy us some time. Obviously, if we had a statewide curriculum map, this is what you're covering these months, you could do an assessment that covered just those standards that you should have had covered by March as opposed to April, which would buy us another month to try and get this stuff done, because I agree with Gordon. When I come in and I'm looking at data now that is 18 months old or 12 months old, it almost seems, I don't want to say useless because it's not, but it seems, I've kind of moved on into a new phase and I have new data. So I'm not sure how valuable it becomes unless you go with trends year after year after year. I would love to see us have a test that we could have the information, even if it was by June or July, it would be much more valuable.
Absolutely.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate your being here. The next item on the agenda is a presentation by National Consultant on Teacher Evaluation. I would like to invite Ashley Cowger to provide an update to the committee, and then we'll hear from TNTP.
So a couple of months ago, Bob reached out to 3 organizations to see how they could support the work of the committee around teacher evaluation and how to make improvements there. Of those 3 organizations, TNTP was selected as the vendor. Jessica Conlin is here with us from TNTP today, and she's going to be sharing the scope of work and the 3 phases and details of those 3 phases that TNTP will be covering now.
Good morning.
Thank you again for having me. I'm Jessica Conlon with TNT. Free to interrupt whenever. I want to start by giving you a little background on our organization in case you're not familiar with it. TNTP is a national nonprofit that has worked for about 15 years with a focus on teacher quality and making sure that our highest need students, our highest need schools have great teachers in front of them. We do that primarily with a focus on finding those teachers, developing those teachers, and keeping them in the classroom. And that's all because we believe everything comes back to student learning. And you build great schools and great classrooms by having great people in front of those students. And so by maintaining a focus on teachers, on great teaching, and on student learning, we have worked with nearly 36 cities across the country, cities, states, districts, charter organizations, and a majority of those engagements have actually been related to teacher evaluation. So designing systems, implementing and training on those systems, and then actually helping to review and improve. Some of those state level engagements include Louisiana, Tennessee, and of course our time here a couple years ago in Indiana, which brings us to our past work here in Indiana with RISE. Beginning in 2010, we supported the IDOE and the state board with designing a teacher evaluation system that aligned with our deep experience in teacher evaluation, as well as with national best practices. That was, of course, before PL 90 was passed. Once PL 90 was passed, we ensured that that design with the new law. Once a design was established, we worked to pilot the RISE system in, it was a pretty robust pilot actually, across 3 large corporations, or 3 varying sizes and demographics of corporations, dozens of schools. That pilot began in 2011. Took about half of a year for the first stage of that pilot. We did a large stakeholder outreach, collected feedback on the early system, RISE 1.0, and then adjusted it accordingly based on that feedback. And then came out with RISE 2.0 for the 11-12 school year. And then at the conclusion of our engagement in 2012,
2012, the system was rolled out statewide. Part of the implementation work was direct hands-on training for evaluators in those pilot districts. And that was really extensive. I think it was something like 27 hours of training for each evaluator. Again, adjusted as we got feedback on the system. Once the system was rolled out statewide, our engagement had already concluded, but what we did was we went in and we trained service centers so they could then go out and basically turnkey that training to the districts across the state. When we left in 2012, the Indiana law, the RISE system, the RISE 2.0 system, was held up as a model across the country. It still is. And we were excited to see what would come of it. Which brings us up to speed today, which is our plan to support Indiana in strengthening its current system, its current policies and implementation. Again, it's one of the strongest systems in the country, which is why we so respect Indiana for taking the time and having the willingness to step back, reflect on the past challenges and successes, and learning from those. We're really proud and excited to be part of that process. As Ashley mentioned, our work will have 3 phases. It'll begin with a policy review pretty much immediately. We'll go into stakeholder engagement in December and January and conclude with recommendations. I'll go into each of these phases in detail, but I want to stop here because I just gave you a lot of information. Any questions?
I have a couple of questions.
Sure.
What percentage of districts are using RISE in comparison to Marzano or Hunter or some made-up system that they've done at the local level?
I would have to check on this, but I believe that it's just about half of the districts are using RISE or a modified RISE version.
And
Right.
of those who are using RISE 2.0,
Yeah.
enhanced, whatever you call it, what percentage of those districts would you say are using it effectively at the implementation?
Well, that's part of our work, actually. At our upcoming work is doing that investigation and probing to find out where is this working and where are their pain points.
So you're going to create a baseline of some kind of where we are in Indiana, and then after your work, present back to us. We were here, and now we're here. Hopefully.
Let's go through the
Something
phases.
like
Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, because I
So
think.
you're going to take us through the
Yeah,
phases,
so I
but-
think that'll
but
help.
Is that the end goal? Is that you're going to try to improve the implementation effectiveness?
I think we're going to make recommendations on how to improve the implementation and effectiveness, and that may include some of those recommendations will be potentially statutory, potentially rulemaking, and potentially just other agency action that could improve implementation at the corporation or school level. Our engagement's only 4 months, so there will be time. There will be an opportunity to actually start to execute on some of those recommendations. I'm not entirely sure.
And a study and coming back with recommendations. That's important work too. So thank you for doing it.
Thank you. So phase 1 will be an initial review of the policies in the state. I'm calling this an initial review because we're going to deliver our high-level recommendations about areas that might need to be addressed at the next board meeting, which is just a few weeks away. We don't want to deliver any really specific recommendations before stakeholder engagement and before we do a deeper analysis of how things are working. All of our recommendations will be aligned with our experience doing this all over the country, national best practices, but of course what we hear out there with many of the stakeholder groups that you've heard. Again, we expect to bring these initial recommendations to the full board at December 3rd. We would of course like to be able to bring these to the committee in advance. I'm not sure the timing will allow for it at this point, but any future recommendations we bring, we'll be working with your staff to make sure we can do that in advance. Phase 2 will begin our stakeholder engagement. We'll work with board staff to make sure that we're identifying the right stakeholders and the right venues for engaging them. We were considering conducting a survey, although I understand that a really great survey in TAS was just the results of which were just presented to the board. I don't want to be duplicative of that, and so we'll work with board staff to determine if that's appropriate. Yeah.
One of the criticisms I had of that particular report, I want to get out there so maybe you can avoid it. It was based on perceptions. I think solely on perceptions. And my question was, where's your evidence of these perceptions? People can have perceptions based on evidence, or they can have perceptions based on whatever. And so I would hope whatever you create, if you're looking at perceptions of people, that you ask them, what evidence do they have to support their perceptions?
Yep.
And at that point, we can take a look at the validity and reliability of that particular comment. And I think that's really important because that prior report dealt with all kinds of perceptions. And when I asked for evidence, they didn't have any. They just asked people, well, how do you feel today?
Right.
And I think it's really critical we take it up to the next level and be sure we're getting valid information.
Yeah, I think that just answers a lot of questions. Why do they? We didn't get that.
We didn't get that at all. And so from my perspective, it wasn't really useful. It was kind of nice to see how people felt, but I could walk outside and talk to people and have them give me their impressions. So hopefully we're going to be a lot more scientific, a lot more in depth. And even with focus groups or interviews, if you're doing those, hopefully they're structured in such a way that it's follow-up questions to get at what evidence that they have. What particular evidence? Did they hear it from someone else, or do they have a document? Have they ever read the law? Have they ever read the guidelines to RISE? Those kind of follow-up questions are really, really critical at a policy level.
Totally,
It's
yeah.
almost like a poll, like do you support candidate A versus candidate B or X office, but then you have no underlying data as to why they feel that way. So just help inform us for policy perspective as to, how do we address some of the concerns that are raised by teachers?
Yep, absolutely. And that honestly is our instinct as well, is that, I think that survey is an excellent place to build from. I know that, I also know educators get surveyed a lot, so I know there's survey fatigue, so I don't want to go back out and ask questions. I'm like, I feel like I just answered this. But through the focus groups or interviews, there may be the opportunity, there definitely is the opportunity to probe on the why on some of those perceptions. Yep, which is why I think that's something that we'll most likely be doing, are be conducting those focus groups with a diverse group of stakeholders across the state. The goal of that, of course, is to be inclusive of all perception. We will likely focus, our idea was to focus the stakeholder engagement on components of implementation, which would then potentially could have implications for legislation or rulemaking, but maybe not to drive into the statute or the law itself with stakeholders. Of course, open to your thoughts on that.
Are you going to disaggregate the information by school corporation or by region some way? Because my comment earlier in this meeting was I see implementation very uneven throughout the state. There are some corporations that are having great success because they're implementing it correctly. Other districts don't. And when you bring all that data together, it could give you a false picture of what's going on.
Yep.
So my recommendation would be to disaggregate the information. You can always aggregate it and bring it to us. But when you come back in next year, I'm going to be asking for disaggregation. See statewide. The other disaggregation I'm curious about is rural, suburban, city. I have sort of this notion of what's happening in city schools and what's happening in other kinds of schools. And so that's just my belief, and I don't share my belief because it's not based on evidence. So I'm hoping that you're going to bring forth some data and evidence that either supports my belief or not, and that we're making policy decisions based on the data.
Absolutely. We'll be working with your staff to make sure that we're all of this early December, so away. We'll have to conclude by mid-January if we're going to actually have the time to analyze and make recommendations for early February. And again, we'll make those recommendations in early February. That will be to the full board. We'll work with your staff to make sure that we will be able to meet with you in advance, meet with this committee in advance of that time. Should our recommendations be adopted by the full board, we'll then work with the stakeholder design committee to start to execute on some of those changes. And that might be the work of additional implementation. It may be potentially drafting rules if that's yeah.
What will your end product look like? Will it be a one-page summary followed by all the data? Or how do you plan on getting that back to us in some kind of way we can make some policy decisions?
Yeah, we'll definitely do, probably, I would imagine, be more than one page, but it'll be a report to the board for sure. And then we can work with you on whatever is most useful for you. If you would like to see the disaggregated data, if you would like that actual the raw numbers, we can absolutely do that.
Maybe in an appendix.
Sure.
If we're,
And then I would assume probably a final report at the conclusion of our contract on March 31st. The status of where the stakeholder design committee is. That's the overview of our work. Again, you can see it's relatively, we're going to be moving pretty quickly. We'll try and stay in touch as much as we possibly can, keep you informed of our progress. But of course, you can always reach out to us and let us know if you have any questions. We'll be working closely with your staff.
Claire, do you have
I just wanted to remind you that the board did initiate rulemaking in July, and the clock has been ticking since then. So through the work of this committee, we are wanting to bring this expertise to advise, and the stakeholders, of course, include the DOE, and making sure that we remain consistent with the waiver principles and all of that. So we have a very compressed time frame just because we want to actually get something helpful and meaningful to the board to try to take some action on the regulations as part of that rulemaking, and then be mindful of where we are with the waiver. The US DOE did still have questions around Principle 3 of our waiver. Even though they did review it, there was still some follow-up information that was needed, so we need to be making sure we're aligning closely with efforts currently underway at the DOE, making sure we bring all that together in a rapid time frame for rulemaking.
is that waiver information to be shared with TNTP so they can assess that, analyze that, and maybe be part of the recommendations?
Absolutely. That's already posted on the US DOE's website and the DOE's website. So we'll make sure that they have that if they don't already. And then, of course, connect them with Sarah Pease, who's here today, and then also Ms. Renee.
Is that everything?
That's everything.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Well, we're so glad to have you on board and excited to see this. You know, it's a 4-month process or so. 4-month process. Working with you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks very
Appreciate
much.
it. I think we'd like to take a quick 5-minute break, and we're at 10:35.
Okay, so the next topic of conversation on our agenda is a discussion of the State Board of Education legislative agenda recommendations. As we've discussed previously, State Board has thought that it would, as part of its statutory responsibilities and duties, is to make recommendations to the legislature on education policy. And we felt it incumbent on ourselves to have a discussion about that as the legislative session approaches. I guess the first thing I would like to hear from the Department of Education staff is, I know that the superintendent has proposed legislation relating to textbooks, and I was wondering if there were any other items on the legislative agenda of the Department of Education.
Budget agenda, there were 4 parts to that. That was released in August. Textbooks is one of them, as you identified, and not just textbook dollars, but really relooking at textbook use and materials. So, for example, there's many states who actually have open source materials. So how else can we look at, with technology and so many of our corps having one-to-one, how can we look at textbook and instructional materials differently, as well as seek an increase in that dollar area? The 3 other areas, and again, this isn't my area of expertise, but I do happen to have just did a roadshow to all the superintendent's conferences. That's okay. So there was 2 related. In the David C. Ford Fund, because what we're hearing from the field is oftentimes they have a great deal of technology equipment, but they don't have the dollars to support the professional development to make sure everybody knows how to use those pieces of technology they have in their classrooms. And then an increase, and actually not even an increase, but a reinstitution of a technology line item that used to exist that has since gone extinct. And really with those dollars, we would be seeking more of the infrastructure and the equity brought to school corporations where they don't have the bandwidth to support the use of technology. So 2 different areas in technology, textbooks, an increase in overall tuition support of 3%. And I don't know those exact figures of what that worked out to be. I can get that for you. And then the 4th area is our second language learner population. Right now, when this was enacted in 1999, I believe, we've now seen a 517% increase of the number of students. And basically the way the language was written around these dollar amounts was to receive $200 per student in your school corporation, but it had a cap on it. So therefore, as the numbers of students have increased, the dollar amount is now down to about $83 per student actually received at the local corp level. So we're seeking monies to bring that back to what the expected was closer to the $200 per student for second language learners, which is our limited English proficient students.
And how have the conversations gone with legislative leadership?
In many cases, well, in some cases it was initiated by some of them in terms of things that they're seeing and or hearing and or knowing our needs for the state. That's, again, Scott Reske, our legislative liaison, could probably answer these a whole lot better than I can, and he'd be happy to. But that's probably the best of my knowledge right now. Does that help?
I have a question. We passed a strategic plan, and we're all working really diligent. And today is an example of us working on that strategic plan. And the strategic plan includes a lot of items that need legislative approval. So, and also funding. So I was wondering, within the state superintendent's package of legislative proposals, I didn't see anything there that's aligned with our strategic plan. So maybe I missed it, but how is the state superintendent supporting our strategic plan by leading legislation and leading funding to implement our strategic plan? Are there things I've missed?
So again, publicly, we announced the budget priorities. Otherwise, Scott would be the best person to talk to about where we're looking at language. For example, one good example would be everything around the performance dollars. The money's the $30 million and the $2 million for teacher leaders and for performance dollars. We're working with Senator Kinley on cleaning up that language to make that more aligned to really what the schools need in terms of deadlines and dates and ways they can use it and so forth. So there are pieces of legislative work that are happening that are either cleanup or aligned to various parts of the waiver or aligned to parts of this plan. But he'd be the right person to ask about those details.
When did we get a copy of the budget priorities?
I don't know how those all went out.
I've never received a copy. Did we get a copy?
I don't believe you did.
So could we get a copy of budget priorities? I think the board would want to know.
And I don't know that there was ever anything written for public consumption. It was rather an announcement made through a press release, and I do believe that the state board staff gets all of our press releases. I don't believe there was anything written in a report in any certain type of way.
So you don't submit a budget?
We have to submit for all our budgets. We submit something called a change package. And
that's what I'm
every
looking
agency
for.
has to do that.
What I'm looking for is some kind of budget, the set of budget that you submit to the legislature. I think it'd be interesting. Because my question is going to be, how does that budget reflect our strategic plan?
Sure.
So I was planning to go point by point in our strategic plan and for budget priorities in the superintendent's plan. And hopefully they are aligned, because if they're not aligned, then we're just essentially wasting our time sitting here and wasting our time putting together strategic plans. So
I'd be happy to get you the change language that existed around those 4 budget changes I just described, as well as, and conversely, I don't know, but I think the state board also has to submit a budget as a group that receives state dollars.
You highlight items that are directly aligned with our strategic plan, so that I can see that there's some importance to what we're doing here.
Sure.
So I'm hoping to see a direct alignment on many of the issues in the plan, not every single one, but at least several of them, so that I get a sense that DOE and our board is working together, because the state superintendent is part of our board and she did approve the strategic plan. So I just want to be sure that we're all working in the same way.
Sure, and I think maybe too, I would offer Lisa Ackerbert, who is our Chief Financial Officer, to maybe present to you as a small group or a larger group, essentially how this works, what agencies are required to do, what happens going into a budget session, because I think there's some nuances that would also help give some background information
Yeah,
to help
Mr.
this
Chair,
conversation.
since it's our strategic plan in this committee, that I would advise maybe having her appear at our next meeting, which is in a few weeks. And again, I don't need a rundown of what
No,
the
no,
process
right.
is. What I'm looking for, again, is the alignment between DOE's budget with the board's approved strategic plan.
I
Would
think
that
the
be okay?
process is helpful only in that it gives you kind of the parameters for which it is agencies are asked to submit. And it also is based on data, what's happened since the last legislative session. You just can't say, I want more money here because. So there's more to the budget change pieces that go to the budget agency than just the suggestion of. So
Right.
I'd like to share that with you
Yeah,
too.
I understand that, but if you're going to be advocating for priorities or maybe new monies, it'd be terrific to go to legislators, I would think, and say, the Board of Education has developed this strategic plan, and this is their direction, and we need maybe new money for this or new money for that, or maybe reallocated money. I would think it'd be a great lever to go to legislators who have many people coming to them for budget items.
Sure.
And so I'm hoping to see evidence of that in our next
absolutely.
meeting.
Yep,
Thank you.
I will get that for you.
Yeah, I think in addition to the budget, if you could have Scott Reske available at our next full board meeting, I know he regularly attends those meetings, but it would be great to have a brief report from him, because we're going to be, it's on our agenda anyway, to talk through legislation. So if he could provide a brief report for us, that includes the information you shared today, but also maybe
I think some of the
a little
greater
bit more,
pieces of things we're seeing.
that would be great.
Yeah,
Thanks.
absolutely. I will do that.
Thank you.
Thanks.
So relating to the State Board of Education legislative agenda recommendations, we are just starting a process at looking at various legislative thoughts and potential recommendations, and I would like to hear from each committee members about items that should be included on the State Board's recommended list of legislative recommendations to the Governor and General Assembly. We will discuss those today, potentially vote on recommendations to bring to the full board on December 3rd. And as a reminder, at the August 2014 State Board of Education meeting where the board voted on the resolution to continue the committee's work, we said that one of our short-term goals would be to create a legislative agenda for the board's consideration and vote. There is also an action item on the December 3rd agenda. And as a technical advisor to the board and educational, well, let me just say that the time is short for bills to be submitted to the legislature. So it's important for us, even though we may like more time to consider some of these issues, and we may consider them over the course of the next year as part of this committee's work, I think it's incumbent on us to at least provide some recommendations to the governor and the legislature on where the State Board of Education feels would be appropriate legislative steps to take in the next session, especially because it's a budget session.
I'll start. I have 6 items for consideration, and I'd like to identify these topics and then maybe put some meat on them in between meetings or have staff work on these. The first item I have is around school turnaround, and we have a very effective subcommittee from this board led by Dan Elsner. And I've talked to Dan about several legislative proposals that I believe that the school turnaround subcommittee is going to be making. And so the first item deals with a whole array of school turnaround issues, hopefully coming from that subcommittee. And so I'm trying to put a tab there where Dan and his committee can put a set of proposals that we will look at as a Second is an issue that came up today, which is the annual release of grades. And I think that really needs to be looked at. Not sure whether we need to do that legislatively or to handle that with the approval of a vendor if we are authorized to do that. And so with the annual entity authorized to issue out contracts to particular vendors. Another item that may need to be handled legislatively is the role of our own board staff. There seems to be a lot of questions about what the role is in relation to other agencies, and we may need to get that clarified. So again, it's another topic. Number 3 or 4, I've lost count. Many times we seek access to outside experts, and sometimes that has been curtailed or undermined. And I just want to be sure that we're clear legislatively that the board has the authority to seek out outside experts when we deem appropriate. Similar to that is our access to data. I've requested particular data over the last year and a half that has not come forward. And sometimes it's a matter of whether or not we're authorized as board members to receive data in order to make decisions. So I think that needs to be looked at also. And lastly, from my list, is this number 6 for those of you who are taking notes? Thanks for helping me. It's the whole issue of pre-K education and pre-K standards. We need to take a hard look at that. And we've been touting the governor's initiative to move forward with pre-K funding and pre-K standards, and the legislature's on board with that. But we need to do more work on that, particularly with the new pre-K pilot and the pre-K standards, to really take a hard look at that. And I know we've started to do that, but like to get some closure and some idea of whether we need legislation on that also. So those are 6 items, sort of placeholders for now. I would ask that potentially staff come back to us with maybe some language on those issues that they deem appropriate for us to consider.
Language and options.
Language and
Under
options,
each category, there'll be a number. For instance, on school turnaround, I think our committee will be making some recommendations, but probably have a fairly healthy list of bullet points on school turnaround committee. So helpful, I think, go through each of those.
And then we have the ability also beyond pay to bring other issues. Talk to constituents, or we think of another one. And the plan is to bring it to our December meeting and then move forward with that. Okay.
Yeah, I think as it relates to December, it's a little bit open-ended because of the short time frame and the fact that we're pulling together a number of different potential pieces of legislation or recommendations, that is. So, I think, hopefully this meeting will put people on notice a little bit that this is something we are considering, so we can receive some input from various stakeholders as to potential legislation that the State Board of Education should be considering, as well as give us some time to come up with some additional recommendations should they be deemed important to look at. Brad?
Sure, thank you. I have a few things, and I'll try to be careful not to repeat things that have been listed. I might want to add to some of the things that Dr. Freitas has pointed out. I guess the way I kind of took this as a homework assignment from the last meeting, I went back and actually looked at the duties of the State Board under IC 2019-2-14, and it's important what I'm going to say, because I take my responsibilities as a board member serious, and it's been a frustrating first year on the board, and I think there is some need for possibly for some legislative remedies. Item number 1 obviously says that we're supposed to establish educational goals. I think the balanced scorecard helps us do that. But 2 says we're supposed to assess the attainment of the established goals. And I would suggest an area of legislative need right now is really defining the use and accessibility of data to the State Board, both from the standpoint of financial data and from the standpoint of student achievement data. In an ideal situation, I would hope that both staffs are able to have a free exchange of information back and forth, but for whatever reason, I feel like I come to these meetings and I think things have happened and things haven't happened, and I'm really kind of concerned about that, about our ability to assess goals if we cannot have open accessibility as a state board, both to where we're at budgetarily, and I do think there is a reason for the State Board to understand where the budget is for the department, because we have actually responsibilities to ensure that we are adequately funding schools out in the field, and I think needs to be an opportunity for the board to weigh in. So I would propose an area of legislation around the whole data, both financial and achievement. The other one talks about, a couple of the other ones in here talk about our ability to ensure compliance with established standards and objectives regarding academic standards. Also talks about our ability to review and ensure the validity and reliability of the ISTEP program. I have real concerns right now as we go through the procurement process about the board's ability to be able to do that. I was a member of the assessment subcommittee. I will tell you that I've recently had a conversation with superintendent, at least one superintendent in the field, whose staff did a crosswalk of acuity, and there's real problems in the math area. And does need to be some clarification in terms around what the board's authority is in terms of both the selection of the exam, but what guidance do we provide to the department so that we know for a fact that we have strong validity and reliability against our state exam that's supposed to be measuring college and career readiness. And of course that dominoes into the waiver. Another area that is of concern to me is this whole idea of under 5. It says we're to make recommendations to the governor and the General Assembly concerning the educational needs of the state, including financial needs. And I have a couple things under that one that I'd love for us to talk about. And one is this need to continue to press the governor, and I don't think it's a hard sell for him, but the General Assembly, we do have a need in the state for high quality preschool. And I know we're doing a pilot, but I would like to see the board commit to really keeping that issue out front. I think there's a lot of confusion between the difference between universal pre-care and what we're talking about in Indiana, which is creating high-quality preschool education, particularly for at-risk students, and I know the governor supports that, and he's committed to doing it the Indiana way. But I'd like to see us, as a board, really kind of keep that issue out in front and what we can do working with our friends over in the General Assembly to write legislation that will really help clarify the best way to roll that out for our kids. Along those same lines, Dr. Freitas mentioned school turnaround, and I do agree. I think that subcommittee probably is in a good position to give us some guidance on what language is needed. I think going back to funding for a second, that's the biggest. There are two areas in school turnaround that concern me the most. One is that right now, the way school turnaround works is we're dealing with symptoms, and it doesn't allow us to deal with what I would call root problems. And what I mean by that is we're going in and dealing with a school, but currently right now we're not able to address systemically some of the larger issues, such as how do you deal with the feeder programs, the feeder elementaries that may be into a middle school. I think the committee can help us make some recommendations on how to clarify some of those things. I'm also concerned about the funding because largely those have been funded what I would call soft dollars, meaning that they're coming from federal funds. And there's been some concern about, as more schools may be potentially identified needing school turnaround, that pool doesn't get bigger, the pool gets stretched thinner. And the question becomes, how does the school board, if we're going to retain responsibility for a school that requires school turnaround, how do we resource that adequately? And that requires a conversation. And I'd like to see some legislation maybe reviewed to say, do we have adequate legislation to do what the board needs to do to meet our obligation to those schools we're trying to help turn around? And then the last one here that I wanted to comment on briefly was the teacher evaluation. I would actually attach to that not just teacher evaluation, but the whole teacher evaluation / teacher compensation model. I have a couple concerns on this. One, obviously, is when we have a year like we've had where the data's come back and 87% of our teachers are effective and highly effective. Having been a building principal, my instincts is that we have created a situation where we're allowing 370 plus districts basically determine their compensation model. And that does have an impact on the way teachers are evaluated, because if I'm a beginning teacher and I'm needing some assistance and my principal knows that and they're trying to retain me, I wouldn't find it hard to believe that a principal is going to be very benevolent in how they score them so that they don't create a pejorative situation for the teacher and negatively impact them. I think we can correct some of that if we would go back and look at our teacher evaluation model and provide some additional structure to that model. I do think there's some concerns that I have around what we're doing to make sure that the leaders responsible, the building principals responsible for that model, are really well prepared to do evaluation well, and that we then address this issue of compensation. Because the other thing that's happening is you're starting to see teachers move from district to district, because if a neighboring district has, for example, say more assessed valuation and they can raise a greater levy with a smaller tax rate, they're going to start picking off the very best teachers from the neighboring district. I'm not certain that's great for students. So I would really like to see us work with the General Assembly. Perhaps these are things that need to have a study committee to look at some actual data to see what the real effect is across the state. But I'm pretty confident we got some very smart people in the state of Indiana that can look at this. And I'm not looking for overhaul of legislation. I'm looking for course corrections that will help stabilize our teachers, help them to feel like they can grow professionally in the district where they have decided to put their roots and make a difference. And I think as a state board, I think we're well within our duties, particularly under 5 when it says we're to make recommendations to the Governor General Assembly. I think we ought to use our best collective common sense to say, here's some areas that if you really want to help. And I would just say this is not meant as a dig at the department, but my concern with the department's comments today is, I get mixed messages when I come here. I'm hearing today there was a press release in August that I've never seen. I remember a September meeting in Fort Wayne where you asked about legislative action. We were told they hadn't even started yet, and the next day there was a press release. I don't know what the status is. I really don't care, but I'm really glad to hear colleagues asking for somebody from the department to come talk with us, because I do know this. If we don't work collectively, if we don't work collaboratively on this together, we're not going to succeed. And that concerns me more than anything. It's the process right now by which we're determining how we best help create legislation that's going to help our students. And I feel like there's a big disconnect right now. And I'm not placing blame. I'm not pointing fingers. I'm just calling on us to do what my colleagues have already called on us to do, which is let's get the department in and let's talk. Because it's more than just increasing the budget, I think. I think it's more than just trying to provide free textbooks. I think if we really want to help our teachers and students, there are some systems right now around teacher evaluation, around assessment, that really do require people to come to the middle and create common sense solutions that have the best chance of helping the most teachers and students in the field.
Yeah, I mean, I would echo your points, and my comment on pre-K is that it has been something that has received a lot of attention in the state in the past month, and I think it would make sense for there to be some discussion of that issue at our next board meeting. And I think, all 3 of us were at the NASB annual conference last month when there was a healthy discussion about pre-K and the effectiveness, and there was a mountain of data showing that pre-K is something that is critically important to helping kids get a head start in their educations. And we were surprised, I think, to learn about the level of funding that states like West Virginia, like Kentucky, and other states are contributing to pre-K education, and quite frankly, cleaning our clocks in that regard. And, I think there are, the governor, to his credit, supported the pilot program in Indiana as it relates to pre-K, 5 counties, and that is going to serve a number of students, and so it's a great start for our state. So I applaud the governor in that effort. At the same time, there has been a lot of concern about a federal grant program that would provide additional funding for pre-K education in the state of Indiana, and therefore I think it would help us, it would help the public, it would help members of the legislature to hear from some of the various individuals who have been involved in those discussions so that we can better understand, where we are to date and what our hopes are going forward. I think from my perspective, I cannot speak highly enough of opportunities that pre-K provide, especially to kids who, whose parents aren't going to pay $10,000, $12,000, $14,000 each year for their kids to have that privilege. And so I think state board needs to I think, have a healthy discussion of this issue, help educate members of the public who are concerned about what they're reading in the news about this issue, as well as members of the General Assembly who, many of whom may have ideological positions as it relates to this issue. And I think it's important for us to have an informed discussion using data, using people who bring credibility to the policy discussion, because I think there is a lot of misinformation out there in the legislature and other places that we can help inform and help them make better decisions as it relates to this very important issue.
This goes back to a comment I made earlier about, do we treat symptoms or do we treat core problems? And I think we've got some great strategies in place right now to continue to close the achievement gap in Indiana. But the reality of it is if our youngest don't start that process until age 7, and you just struggle to close the gap. So I appreciate your comments on that.
I think you could take a poll of every kindergarten teacher in the state of Indiana, and they will be able to tell you which students were in level 3, level 4 pre-K programs and which were not. And the ones that are not, even though they may have the best parents in the world, obviously a technical advisor to the board and an education policy advisor to Governor Pence, if you could transmit or share with us what you can. I know that the governor's legislative agenda has not been fully announced at this date and it will be forthcoming, but if you could share with us your thoughts.
Sure, and I don't want to cut off. BJ, were you going to make comments too? And then I want to ask some clarifying questions on your agenda requests.
If I could, I would just echo as the state. I think the pre-K is probably the most important item that could be on our agenda. I think the students come in behind, play catch up. It creates an atmosphere that's really, really hard to overcome. And the second one I had down, was the turnaround academies. I had the opportunity to sit in on the turnaround academy here in Evansville, and I think that the committee we've established is going to have recommendations that are thorough and will be very valuable to all the schools who are going to come into this zone. Those are the two that I had, and I don't remember who it was, if it was David or Gordon. The school varies. I think Brian Smith spoke to this morning. I think if there is a way to speed up that process and get those as kind of a year-end, here is where we are, that would be something that would be very, very valuable.
Well, let me respond first to some of your questions on pre-K, and then I just want to ask some questions about the task you've given us in advance of the December 3rd meeting. So you may have seen the announcement yesterday, and if not, I'd be happy to forward it to you. FSSA sent out a media advisory yesterday that they've started enrolling providers. The way that it works is a provider has to say, I'd like to participate to receive these funds, and they have to meet the quality criteria that were established in law. So there's a provider application process, and then in that announcement, FSSA said they'd be releasing information next week about how families can start to apply for the soft launch, if you will, of the pilot in January for a half year. So that is happening. 4 of the 5 counties have said that they're ready to launch in January. And then the full launch is going to be in August. So there will be another round of applications for families wanting to enroll in a year-round program. So as you just mentioned, Gordon, the governor hasn't yet announced his agenda. So I would be happy to come back and talk perhaps on the December 3rd agenda if that timing works out, along with Scott Reske for the DOE, and just talk about what the governor's agenda is, if it's public at that time. So that's it on pre-K.
If I could just make one additional comment on pre-K before you turn to the next couple topics. in Marion County, we just recently had an agreement by Mayor Ballard's office as well as the City Council on the issue of pre-K funding, as well as the corporate community in Indianapolis, which has embraced pre-K and stepped up to the plate. And so I would praise Lily and others that are participating in the pre-K effort here in Marion County. Now, of course, those are public dollars that are borne by the taxpayers of Marion County, as well as private dollars coming in to support what's going to happen over the next couple or more years here in Marion County. And that is a great program, and I support that. But I will also make the comment that I do believe that this issue is one that should be funded by the state of Indiana, because it is, even though individual communities are making efforts on their own because they view it as a critically important issue, and it addresses so many other issues than in addition to education. It addresses the economy, it addresses crime, and I would laud those efforts. However, I feel that, as a member of the State Board of Education, I want to make it clear that I think it is the state's responsibility to step up to the plate and fund those efforts, rather than local taxpayers.
And one thing, Claire, I would just hope that, and I don't know if we can get these from NASB, but if we could get the slides, particularly from New Jersey, from West Virginia, and Kentucky, because when we're talking about this issue, we actually did have a little bit of conversation on this when we were in a presentation in Colorado NASB. You almost have to look at it, again, systemically. You have to look at what is the impact. And the data that they have that I would hope the staff can get their hands on, I think it's important to the pilot, is that we're collecting metrics to look at how much we're able to close that kindergarten readiness gap. But the other thing, and we won't be able to get this data, is they've been doing it enough now. They have data on the back end to show how much they've been able to reduce dropout, how much they've been able to increase graduation. They've even been able to disaggregate the data versus students that had access to preschool, college and career ready. I mean, it was amazing when you see the before and after of that stimulus applied. So I would hope that we look at it, but I want to keep that conversation more than just providing preschool education. I want it to be more of why would we do this? And
You're the good, we know that there have been challenges in other states as it relates to pre-K, and so we want to understand the evidence that relates to what we need, what landmines we need to avoid. And again, I know that the governor's pilot program was crafted in such a way that it attempted to avoid some of those landmines. I would just say with the level 3, level 4 certification, probably among the highest of those, that's a great start. And, it's very exciting that those standards were implemented as part of the pilot program. But I think we do want to hear as well about other states, their success, but also where they had challenges. And because we are a little bit behind, unfortunately, that also gives us some lessons learned from other jurisdictions.
Just want to make a comment. I know you're getting ready to speak, but I understand the governor's notion of doing it the Indiana way, and I applaud that. However, there are many basic foundational ingredients of what quality early childhood pre-K is. And so I certainly would agree with my colleagues that at the national meeting, those 3 particular states had the evidence. And we always talk about data-driven decision-making. Why would we reinvent longitudinal studies, which I supported at the last meeting, by the way, for Indiana, because I think we have some unique characteristics. But there are some basic principles that we should learn from other states and not reinvent the wheel. And there's a lot of pre-K educators out in Indiana who have a good research backgrounds and understand what it's all about. And I know you're already engaging those people. So let's move forward. And sometimes it's not always a funding issue, and in the press it seemed to be. It's only a funding issue. It's much more than that. It's doing it the Indiana way, to learning from other states, and hopefully we'll do that.
Well, and we have had updates, but not at the last couple of meetings, I don't think, on the pilot, but it is on the agenda for December. So I just want to remind you that we actually are lucky, I guess, to be late because you can learn from other states. And the Early Learning Advisory Committee, which was created in statute in the 2013 session, and it has 6 appointed members, including a representative from the DOE, Charlie Geyer, FSSA, and the person who oversees the CCDF and Head Start program, as well as some pre-K providers. And then they have created 7 working groups around the state. So there's more than 100 experts, philanthropists, business folks, everybody in communities around the state that have been working diligently to fulfill the requirements for the pre-K pilot. There was a number of questions that we were required to give an update to the legislature, which occurred in October. And I believe that report was shared with you, but I can re-forward that to you, and some of the work and recommendations. And some of that has been coming to you in bits and pieces along the way. In addition, a longitudinal study was required by the legislature because there is actually mixed data, mixed results. And so we want to make sure that we are being very thoughtful about our design parameters so that we have success from the start. And then we're actually tracking that through 3rd grade, which is what the statute requires, and seeing the outcome with the control group that doesn't go to pre-K, and then those folks that do go to pre-K that meet our quality criteria. So I think I hear and appreciate everything you're saying, and I think that was the intent of the pilot design, so that we get it right, and then we track it and make sure we have data that proves the point.
I think it's important to note too.
Appreciate that very much. And also on the federal grant, I think there was some confusion that it was an $80 million grant that could come to the state, but it was actually a competitive grant that was $20 million a year, potentially over 4 years, and only 1 year had been appropriated by Congress. Now with the change in Congress, I don't know what's going to happen with continued funding, so just to clarify that. So I want to make sure that I understand the assignment you've given us. We heard from Danielle and about the department's agenda, the strategic plan, making sure that all those things are aligning, and then the items that you've just said. If it's okay with you, what I'd like to suggest is that we get together with the DOE, make sure we understand what their proposal is in advance of December 3rd, and come up with some areas that may require legislation versus board rule making, because obviously that's easier than statutory changes. Also, you don't want to necessarily legislate everything when you have the ability to just implement that, and that's just an implementation decision. So if that's okay with you, we'll try to parse that out so you don't have a list of 50 statutes you want to get changed or enacted, and that might or might not be possible.
So your priority will be to go the rulemaking route with the board. If we don't have the authority through rulemaking, then put it through the legislative hopper.
Yes, and
I think that's great strategy.
Great, and some of it might just be implementation too. That doesn't even require regulation. So if we can all get an agreement and agree at the December 3rd board meeting, that would be a lot easier than either regulatory or statutory changes. Does that sound okay?
I have one other question. I've been on the board legislative leaders in each house and of course the Senate. And because we've taken on this role of legislative agenda setting for the board, should we invite either one or both of those to attend a future meeting? And I would include Representative Baining and also Mr. Cruz on the Senate side. It might be good for them to sit down, if they're available, to meet with our subcommittee, just have a discussion of some of these issues. We send things forward, and there's not a lot of subcommittee or board discussion, although a lot of us meet with these people individually, but yet it doesn't have the same kind of impetus that it would if a subcommittee or the full board would meet. So I'll turn it over to our chair.
Well, I would say I would welcome a meeting, and I think we have to be flexible, first of all, because we know how busy their schedules are going to be, starting now.
going forward the next through the long session. So I would welcome a time to sit down with them, you know, as a group, individually, you know, with their key staff, however they would like to do it. Certainly face-to-face, I think, would be best, but schedules. And then also I would include members of the minority caucus in both houses, so that we may, Representative Elaf and Senator, to include them in the mix. Make sure that we have their attention as well.
I just wanted to make a quick comment too, because you know, as we're talking about legislative agenda items, one of these I love about Working Declares, I think you have a good sense of when we're coming at it. I'm not necessarily proposing new legislation on every one of these topics, and I appreciate your comments. I do want to provide a big picture view of what I think would be ideal is when we can get the General Assembly, the State Board, and the Department lined up in a perfect row. And what I mean by that is, in an ideal situation, I would hope that the General Assembly provides enough legislation, so like you said, not prescribe everything, but adequately define direction enough the State Board to promulgate policy that then allows the Department then to provide the technical assistance and to some extent some enforcement of that. And certainly gathering the evidence back for the State Board to communicate back up to the General Assembly the effectiveness of what we set out to do. The biggest concern I've had over the last 3.5 years in Indiana is we've passed a lot of reform, which was needed. I'm not questioning that. But sometimes I'm not sure that those entities have always been in the best alignment. So you get these disconnects where one group passed the law and they had kind of a view of the world. There's the State Board that had a view and they're trying to set policy, and then there's the Department who's trying to interpret both statute and rule and find their own interpretation in some instances. And I think we're at a point now that we go further in passing new legislation. I'd really like to see what we can do to create communication flow from the General Assembly to the State Board to the Department, clarify that alignment. So as we promulgate statutes and policies and rules and enforce them, we really do serve students and teachers and serve the state. Laws. I think we're in a conversation. We need like several conversations to bring to the table to help improve that alignment.
One thing I wanted to let you know is that the turnaround committee has gone into Gary and in Evansville and met with and invited lawmakers to attend those committee hearings. And we were actually, it was requested that that committee, when it's done with its report, come and make a presentation to both the Senate and House Education Committees. So I have relayed that to both Senator Cruz and Representative Baining. So we might consider having you as the chair of the committee come and report, because if it's all of you, then it's an open meeting. So if you would be okay with that, I'd be happy to do that as well. Great. Anything else for us?
I have a question. One more question. Is single class basketball going to be part of the? No, I'm just kidding. It should be. Editorial comment. Okay, I think that kind of wraps up our conversation on legislation. If I'm not mistaken. We will meet next on December 4th. Going forward, we'd like to schedule committee meetings about 8 to 10 days in advance of regular board meetings, so that the outcomes from the committee can be sent to the full board 1 week prior to the regular board meetings. In 2015, the board meets on January 7th and then again on February 4th. Given the work that we're doing with TNTP, perhaps we can aim for a committee meeting in mid-January. We should probably look at our calendars right now and see, along with TNTP, if there's a date that we can set now. And if that doesn't work for TNTP, we can do it kind of offline on email, just however you'd like to do it.
You mean on February 4th? Yeah, okay. Why don't we punt on setting the meeting dates, and we can have some offline schedule communication as to availability. And I know that BJ had some thoughts about board meetings or committee meetings as well. And so I think probably it's appropriate from a scheduling standpoint just to do that offline.
Well, BJ is downstate, right? About 3 hours, and I'm north, about 3 hours. So that would mean if we had it upstate, and BJ would drive 6 hours. So from my perspective, I'm not sure where you could hold a meeting where it'd be convenient. Other than, I think the turnaround committee met around the state because they wanted to meet with school personnel. I'm not sure we have that same purpose.
I'd probably say keep it here in Indianapolis. I think it's easier for department staff. It's easier for your staff than state board staff. Since I live in downtown Indianapolis, it's super easy. BJ, did you have any comments on the schedule? I know you had sent me an email.
BJ, are you still there? I apologize, I missed a friend in the meeting, and I would like to get together afterwards on the balanced scorecard, just as a question, and at some point, maybe asking for that to find its way. I'll get with the chair on that.
Well, I think we can consider this meeting adjourned. So again, thank you everyone for attending. We appreciate the presentations. And we look forward to continuing to work on these very important